A warm welcome to all our viewers. Today in this session, we are going to see about the corporate insolvency resolution process under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. When one reads the long title of the code, one will see that it lays down the objectives of the code in a detailed manner. The first and foremost objective for the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is to rescue a company which is in distress. It is followed by the objective of maximizing value of the company's assets, and in doing so, it also requires that the interests of all stakeholders be balanced. This order of objectives is sacrosanct, hence needs to be adhered to by all participants in a corporate insolvency resolution process. If we look at the code deeply, the code is comprehensive and hence provides all the necessary building blocks and elements that is required to resolve a company that is in distress. This corporate insolvency resolution process is a game for which the rules are laid down in the code and the regulations that are made for this purpose. While we look at the rules of the games, let us begin with looking at who the players in this game are. Foremost is the company which is in distress and is required to be resolved. This process of insolvency resolution is conducted by a regulated professional called the insolvency professional, IP in short. He conducts this process under the supervision of the committee of creditors, who are essentially lenders to this company or the corporate debtor. There are also other claimants who are involved with the company either through lending arrangements or by the way that they run business operations or sellers or vendors of this company. Along with them, the other stakeholders are also employees and workmen of the company. During the process, other professionals called registered valuers, accountants, legal professionals are also part of this process. This is the close circle in players in this game of CIRP. Along with them are other institutions like the Insolvency Professional Agency, which is the frontline regulator for these insolvency professionals. The IBBI, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, is the prime regulator established under this code, which regulates the IPs and the IPS also. Along with this, we also have a second set of registered valuers, professionals who are members of registered valuers organizations and work with the insolvency professional in estimating the value of the company under insolvency and are part of this game. There is also the NCLT, which is the adjudicating authority for this under the code, and under the supervision of the NCLT, this entire process is conducted. Now, in the following slides, we will go through the details of the process from the time where the company is admitted into this process until the time that this process closes, either through a resolution plan or through a liquidation order. Let's begin. The first question is, who can apply for a company to go into this kind of resolution process? Three sets of people can be applicants. One is the financial creditor. These can be banks or financial institutions or any creditor who has lent to the company in question, and the only consideration for such lending is the time value of money. That is, to say in simple words, an interest consideration is applicable to this financial transaction. The second set of creditors who can apply for initiating this process under the IBC are operational creditors. These are vendors, workmen and employees, and government to whom the company owes money and is required to pay due to its transactions with this set of creditors. The third set of applicants who are eligible is the corporate debtor or the companies themselves. Now these provisions are made available under section 7, 9 and 10 of the code respectively. There is one other primary criteria that any company has to meet in order for it to be taken to insolvency resolution. That is, there needs to be an default of rupees 1 crore, a minimum of rupees 1 crore for a company to be eligible to enter into this process. So so we have seen who can apply for this process. The code also says that some set of companies cannot be brought into this process. One is if a company is already undergoing a CIRP process or has just come out of a CIRP process in the last 12 months, or where a company or a financial creditor has violated the terms of a resolution plan under an earlier CIRP process, or if a company is already in liquidation, then for such companies CIRP cannot be initiated. So we have seen who can make the application and who cannot make the application. Now we will see to who this application goes. This application is submitted with the adjudicating authority, in this case the NCLT. So once the application is submitted, the code provides that the NCLT make an order on this application within 14 days. Once on admission, there is an order that the NCLT issues in which three things are mentioned. One is that this company on the application of so and so creditor has been admitted into the CIRP process. Two, an identified insolvency professional has been appointed as the interim resolution professional under section 16, and a moratorium on the company is also made eligible. Let's see, the interim resolution professional is an insolvency professional who is registered with IBBI. Whoever applicant is submitting the application to NCLT has to, as part of the application, submit a name of the IP who he would require to act as a IRP in this process. Supposing that the applicant has not proposed any insolvency professional in the application, the IBBI provides a panel of eligible professionals who can be appointed by the NCLT itself. So once the IP is appointed, he is appointed as the interim resolution professional, and simultaneously he comes and takes over the company, and the powers of the board of creditors of a company which is entering into CIRP is suspended. And this moratorium that we are talking about is applicable for all suits, proceedings, recovery. Any legal action against this company cannot be initiated nor can it be continued when this company is in CIRP. Similarly, the provision of essential services like power, water or communication facilities for this company cannot be terminated just because the CIRP process has been initiated. Similarly, wherever a company, while in its normal course has been using services of other vendors, has licenses and permits or granted by various government departments, those cannot be revoked or cancelled just because the company has entered into this resolution process. When this moratorium is in place, the basic objective is that the company gets a free period where the committee of creditors and the insolvency professional who is conducting the process can sit together and think and plan for a revival of the company without the interference of other issues. Once when this admission order has come, then the IRP takes over this company, and the first task that the interim resolution professional carries out is to give a public announcement This public announcement is issued in at least two national newspapers, one in English and one in Hindi. It invites claims from all the creditors who are associated with this company, and it contains all the details of the company and the last date by which the claimants have to submit their claims. Now this claims process, the code and the regulation provides for a detailed claim submission and verification process. All categories of creditors, be it financial creditors, operational creditors, employees, workmen or statutory dues, have specific forms in which they have to submit their claims. Any claims so submitted is verified by the interim resolution professional and then admitted into the process. Similarly, this process of claim verification can continue up to 90 days from the commencement of the process. Commencement of process is counted from the date of order of admission given by the NCLT. Once the IRP collates these claims, he prepares what is called the list of creditors and files it with the IBBI from time to time and updates it as and when required. The second important player in this CIRP is the Committee of Creditors. The IBC is called a creditor in control approach, essentially because the Committee of Creditors supervises this process and it is constituted of financial creditors who are unrelated to the company. In companies where there are no unrelated financial creditors, this committee is constituted by operational creditors. Once the claim verification process is complete, the IRP constitutes the committee of creditors and submits a report saying that he has constituted the committee to the NCLT. Once this application is made to the NCLT, he subsequently holds the first meeting of the Committee of Creditors. One important point here is that the Committee of Creditors is a very powerful institution and it is required to supervise the actions of the IP while conducting the process and also to make all important decisions relating to the running of the company and its business while it is running the process. Similarly, the code provides that the Committee of Creditors with a 90% voting share amongst themselves can decide to withdraw or to liquidate the company at any point in time. This option for withdrawal is provided under section 12A of the IBC. Now, once in the first meeting of the Committee of Creditors, it is required that these Committee of Creditors choose a resolution professional. Either the IRP can be required to continue as the resolution professional or a new resolution IP can be chosen as the resolution professional. From here onwards, the RP conducts the process. In the next 15 minutes, we will see the different activities that the RP will conduct in order to run and complete this process. The first and primary duty of the RP is to conduct the process, and he is also responsible for running the business operations of the company. For running the business operation of the company, the RP can raise interim finance with the help of the COC and appoint accountants, legal or any other professional who can help him to run the company. And since he has assumed the powers of the board of directors, he can enter into contracts on behalf of the company also. One other essential element for us to understand in a CIRP is that the Committee of Creditors has to assess and understand the value that the company holds and should be able to communicate it to the market so that the market can provide suitable resolution plans to resolve this company and to enable its rescue. How is this process done? This process is done through what is called a valuation exercise carried out by two registered valuers. They are appointed by the insolvency professional within 47 days from the commencement of the process, and they assess what is called the fair value and a liquidation value for the company at the date of the insolvency commencement. Now this value provides, this report that the valuers give provides all the details of the assets and liabilities of the company, and also provides what is called the liquidation value. That is, if the company was to be liquidated at the date of insolvency commencement, what is the value that the company would get. All of these details are included in what is called an information memorandum, along with the audited financial statements of the company in the previous 2 years, the complete list of creditors, any litigations that the company might be facing, and details of all the workers and employees is put into this document. And this information memorandum forms the basis on which the company is assessed by the resolution applicants in the next step. Once the RP has prepared this document, which is the information memorandum, the COC takes note of this information memorandum and then decides to call for resolution plans from the market. This process happens in 2 stages. Initially, there is a form called the Form G, which the insolvency professional publishes in 2 newspapers and invites for other eligible companies to come and express their interest in taking over this company. This expression of interest provides for basic details of the company, the critical dates within which he has to submit the invitation, and specify what are the criteria for a prospective resolution applicant. Another important point to be noted here is that section 29A of the code provides a set of ineligibility criteria. People who are ineligible under this section cannot act as resolution applicants in this process and will not be able to participate or take over this company. So any resolution applicant who is applying for the process should ensure that he is eligible under the provisions of section 29 of the code. The second step in the invitation of resolution process is the issue of request for resolution plan, which is RFRP in short. This RFRP contains the information memorandum and the evaluation matrix. The evaluation matrix is the set of conditions that the COC has decided, which is required for any resolution plan to be considered, and this set of conditions will form the basis on which every resolution plan is considered and a viable and feasible plan selected. The RFRP then subsequently is provided to every eligible prospective resolution applicant, and any provisions for modification of this RFRP is also available with the RP and the COC. Once the list of resolution applicants are collected, the resolution professional is required to check the eligibility of these resolution applicants in respect of section 29A, and if he finds any resolution applicant ineligible, those people will be dropped, and only eligible resolution applicants move on to a final list of resolution applicants who are then eligible to submit their resolution plans. Once the resolution plans are received from the resolution applicants, then subsequently the RP and the COC open these resolution plans and consider them in order to select a resolution plan that will best suit the resolution of this company. The basic parameters that any resolution plan should have is that that it should propose a strategy that is easy to implement and is viable, economically viable, and addresses the basic cause of default because of which the company has initially gone into insolvency resolution. The plan should provide for the insolvency resolution process cost, which includes the fees of the insolvency professional and the cost for running the business during the CIRP period, or all part of the insolvency cost, which is required to be paid by the resolution applicant on a priority. The resolution plan should also provide for payment of a certain minimum amount to operational creditors and to any financial creditor who may dissent to a resolution plan while they are considering it for approval. And this resolution plan, while it's being considered, should also provide for management of affairs of the company while it is being implemented, and should also have provisions for how this plan implementation will be supervised. Any resolution plan should ensure that it is compliant with all laws at that point in time. The consideration of the resolution plans is done by the Committee of Creditors. The Committee of Creditors have to approve a plan or reject a plan with 66% of voting. So the time period for the entire process of arriving at a resolution plan and approving it by the Committee of Creditors and its subsequent approval by the NCLT is 180 days as provided under section 12 of the code. The code also provides that the period for CIRP can be extended by another 90 days with the permission of the NCLT if it's so required. Once this resolution plan is approved by the adjudicating authority, this resolution plan is then binding on all stakeholders, including government and statutory authorities. The resolution applicant has the flexibility to design the resolution plan to incorporate any kind of strategy that will enable the company which is under distress to revive and to run successfully once it is taken over by the resolution applicant. And section 29A ensures that only people with clean antecedents can participate in this process, and the company is in good hands after the resolution process is completed. There is also certain amount of checks that the Committee of Creditors can impose to ensure that a resolution plan is successful. One is to do their due diligence on the resolution plan and the resolution applicant who is taking over. Second is the requirement of a performance security from the resolution applicant in order to ensure his investment in the resolution plan. And third of all, the code also provides penal actions for a situation where the resolution applicant whose plan has been approved is not implemented the plan in a manner he has proposed. These entire set of activities have to be completed within 180 days as we've seen, or latest by 270 days. This chart here shows that the steps of processes that we have so far discussed and the timelines associated with this. If suppose within the 180 days no resolution plan is approved by the Committee of Creditors, or in the event that the Committee of Creditors feel that there is no viable means of resolving the company under consideration, then the Committee of Creditors can decide to take this company to liquidation. If that is the case, the resolution professional, after approval by the Committee of Creditors, applies to the adjudicating authority requesting that orders for liquidation against this company be passed. Then the process continues as a liquidation process and is governed by the liquidation regulations under the code. Another important element of the CIRP is the determination of avoidance transactions and the filing of applications in this regard by the resolution professional. The code mandates that the resolution professional identify any questionable or suspicious transactions. There are 4 kinds of such transactions. Preferential transactions under section 43, where any transaction that the company has made preferring one set of creditors over others is considered a preferential transaction. An undervalued transaction, where the value of a transaction is reflected lower in order to benefit a certain person or entity, is undervalued transaction. Fraudulent transactions or extortionate transactions. These are the 4 kinds of transactions that are questionable or are considered as avoidance transactions. Also under section 66, the code provides that any fraudulent trading or wrongful trading that the promoters of the company have taken up before the period of CIRP, from the date of its application to the date of initiation, whatever the potential loss that has been caused to the creditors because of the promoters' actions, such transactions and such value can be identified and estimated, and the RP is required to make an application to the adjudicating authority so that the value lost through these transactions can then be recovered and made part of the company itself. This process is complete end to end and provides for all necessary elements that a resolution professional and the committee of creditors require for bringing a company to resolution. I hope in the previous half hour we have been able to understand the corporate insolvency resolution process under the code in a wholesome manner. Thank you.
Hello learners, in this program I will discuss about the Rapa-Kivi texture. It is a magmatic texture in which alkali feldspar is rimmed by plagioclase. Remember, alkali feldspar is rimmed by plagioclase. Plagioclase is calcic plagioclase. Example is Rapa-Kivi granite. Rapa-Kivi texture found in granite, therefore we call it as Rapa-Kivi granite. We use Rapa-Kivi texture as a prefix here to define a rock. Rapa-Kivi granite shows feldspars. These are the feldspars, rounded feldspars. These are the rounded feldspar grains without plagioclase rims, and typical orthoclase feldspar with darker plagioclase rims. Some of the orthoclase they have darker plagioclase rims. These are the darker plagioclase rims here. As a result, you get formation of Rapa-Kivi texture. How this Rapa-Kivi texture looks under the microscope? It shows Rapa-Kivi texture. Here Sanidine is a high temperature feldspar, rich alkali feldspar surrounded by polysynthetically twinned. This, see here, these strips of polysynthetically twinned oligoclase. Oligoclase is again a variety of plagioclase. So these feldspars were produced by mixing of sanidine bearing rhyolite magma with basaltic andesite magma. So, if you find such kind of texture, what does it indicate?
A very warm welcome to everyone. There are two modes of reorganization in the code. First is insolvency resolution process, which we have already learned in the previous half presentation given by my colleague. And the second mode of reorganization is liquidation process, which we shall be covering in this session. Prior to the enactment of the code, the liquidation process in the form of winding up was being governed by Companies Act 1956 and later on by Companies Act 2013. However, with the code coming into force in 2016, the liquidation process is now primarily governed by the IBC, and only one specific reason for which winding up could be initiated in the Companies Act have moved to the IBC, that is inability to pay debts by the corporate person or a company. So only one reason has been taken out of the Companies Act and have been inserted into the IBC process. It is very pertinent to note that the liquidation process cannot be initiated directly by a corporate debtor. Our corporate debtor has to undergo an insolvency resolution process, and only upon its failure a liquidation process can be initiated. The code provides that there are four modes of initiating a liquidation process. First and foremost is that in case the adjudicating authority does not receive a resolution plan within the maximum period permitted for the CRP. Secondly, if the COC recommends liquidation initiation of the CD itself. Thirdly, suppose a plan has been approved by the COC and then it has also been approved by the adjudicating authority, but during the implementation the terms and conditions of the approved resolution plan are not adhered by the successful resolution applicant, then the company can be sent to the liquidation by the adjudicating authority. And finally, if the approved resolution plan by the COC does not fulfill the conditions which has been mandated under the code. So these are the four reasons for which an liquidation process can be initiated under the code. Now, as soon as the liquidation process gets initiated, the responsibility comes on the shoulders of the IP in a form of the liquidator. That is, A appoints a liquidator. In most of the cases, the RP who was working during the CRP process. So the RP continues unless his appointment is rejected by the adjudicating authority as a liquidator during the liquidation process. And on the appointment of liquidator, all the powers of the board of directors, KMPs, that is key managerial personnel, and partners of the CD shall cease to have effect and vest in the liquidator. Now, there are certain conditions also that liquidator needs to fulfill before his appointment as the liquidator. First and foremost is that the liquidator, basically the IP, who is willing to get appointed as a liquidator, should be independent of the IPE, that is insolvency professional entity, of which he is a director or a partner. he should be independent of that IPE, or rather IPE should be independent of the corporate debtor. Secondly, in case any partner or a director of the IPE of which the liquidator is a director or partner starts representing any stakeholder in the liquidation process, at the same time he needs to file the application with the AA and he cannot continue as a liquidator. Finally, a liquidator also needs to make appropriate disclosure of his relationship with the stakeholders or the CD with the board, that is the IBBI, and the adjudicating authority. Now there is a very pertinent question that who will determine the fee of the liquidator? Now the processes under the code are completely market driven. Liquidator fee in the first instance, the liquidator fee needs to be governed by the conditions negotiated duly by the committee of creditors appointed during the CRP and the RP. So in case the COC fails to determine the fee of the liquidator during the CRP, then in that case the regulations, that is the liquidation regulations, provide a fallback option in terms of the table. Table we'll just see in the next slide, but before that it's important to understand that for the period of compromise or arrangement, the liquidator shall be paid the same fees as the RP was being paid during the CRP, and for the balance period the table will determine. So we'll come in a while to the table in the next slide, but before that, in some cases it has been seen that the funds are not sufficient with the liquidator to run the whole process. In order to plug this gap, the liquidation regulations have been amended to provide that the financial creditors who are financial institution should contribute the excess of the liquidation cost over the liquid assets of the CD to run the process, and this shall be repaid back with the applicable rate of interest to the member who is contributing. Now, as we were discussing about the table, if we see this table, if we see the second column, this table clearly shows that in order to incentivize the process, early completion of the process, and before coming to the table, I'll just mention one more important point here, that the regulations mandate that the whole process should be completed within 1 year of the initiation itself. Now to incentivize further, the regulations provide that in the first 6 months, if the realization happens and distribution also happens in the first 6 months, the liquidator shall be paid the highest fees. In the next 6 months, these fees shall go down, and if the realization and distribution happens after 1 year, these slabs go further down. And for an example, if we see the row wherein we have mentioned on the first 1 crore, in the first half of the table, amount of realization for the first 1 crore is 5%, and for distribution we have provided 2.5%. So in total, a liquidator who is able to realize as well as distribute within the first 6 months is able to garner 7.5 lakh on the first 1 crore. So that's a very good amount. So he will be adequately remunerated also. The liquidation process broadly encompasses 3 responsibilities for the liquidator. First and foremost is the adjudication of the claims. Second is the realization through the sale, and third is the distribution. So we'll go by one to these 3 broad responsibilities, but to undertake these 3 responsibilities, liquidator have been given adequate powers that in the discharge of his duties, responsibilities and functions, he can appoint any number of professionals, but they should be commensurate with the responsibility entailing the underlying CD itself. And the professional appointed or proposed to be appointed should also make necessary disclosure of the relationship with any of the stakeholder to the liquidator. So coming to the first broad responsibility of the liquidator during the process. Liquidator, this is very much similar to the corporate insolvency resolution process, but with a little bit extended timelines compared to the insolvency resolution process. The first and foremost task upon appointment, the liquidator needs to make the public announcement within the first 5 days. Then in the announcement itself, he needs to specify that within the 30 days from the liquidation commencement date, the stakeholders should file their claim. And it's very important that all the stakeholders should file their claims within the first 30 days. Otherwise, stakeholders have only one resort to get their to file their claims, is that they need to approach the adjudicating authority. So these first 30 days for filing the claims is very important. After the liquidator has taken a decision on the admission or rejection of the claim, the stakeholder or a creditor gets under 14 days to file an appeal against the decision of the adjudicating authority. And during the normal business transactions, we find that the CD is not necessarily a debtor only. He can be debtor as well as a creditor. So there can be mutual dealings of the CD to any operational creditor. That CD has become a debtor in one instance, and then in another instance he has become a creditor. So liquidator has been duly empowered to mutually set off these claims and to arrive at the net amount payable to the CD or to the other party. To ensure that the process is transparent and regular monitoring happens throughout the process, there are some filing requirements for the liquidator. He needs to ensure that within the first 75 days of the liquidation commencement, he submits the preliminary report and the asset memorandum. Preliminary report just talks about the capital structure of the CD, estimates of assets and liabilities, or the banks of the book based on the books of account. So these are the preliminary information, and these details, basically the details of the assets and liabilities of CD, go further down, deeper in case of asset memorandum. That also gets filed within the first 75 days. But herein, the valuation of the assets, expected realization, what will be the mode of sale, manner of sale, gets elaborately provided. It may be noted that this asset memorandum is confidential in nature, and it should not be shared by the liquidator with any of the stakeholder unless it has been permitted by the adjudicating authority. Then the regulations also provide that there should be a quarterly filing of the progress report to ascertain the progress during the process. Finally, upon the completion of the process, the final report gets submitted, and that is a sort of, that contains a checklist also, that what kind of actions have been undertaken by the liquidator during the process, and if any asset is yet to be realized and any litigation is pending. So now stakeholder can demand copy of these reports also from the liquidator, and based upon submission of a fee and undertaking, filing a confidential undertaking that these reports shall not be misused in any manner, liquidator is mandated to share these reports with the stakeholder. The responsibility of the liquidator does not end with the sharing or with the completion of the process. Even after the completion of the process, liquidator is mandated to preserve these reports, books of accounts, registers for 8 years subsequent to the closure of the process. So the responsibility of the liquidator continues even after the closure of the process. So first, regular monitoring process was through regular filing, mandated for the liquidator, and second monitoring mechanism is through constitution of stakeholder consultation committee. Herein we'll make a distinction between the stakeholder consultation committee and the committee of creditors. We have already learnt what is committee of creditors. Committee of creditors is, during the CRP in the previous presentation, it was already informed that committee of creditors constitute only of the financial creditors. Now SCC is completely opposite to that. That does not only include the financial creditors, be it secured or unsecured. it also includes the workman and representative of workmen and employees, government and shareholder. So all the classes of the stakeholders gets representation in the stakeholder consultation committee. But there is one more crucial difference between the SCC and COC, that the decision of the CO, there are some certain crucial decisions which the resolution professional cannot take without the explicit approval of the COC. But in COC, all the recommendations are non-binding. However, they have a moral it creates a moral obligation on the liquidator, because if the liquidator does not adhere to the advice given by the SCC, then he'll have to provide the reasons for not adhering to the advice and submit to the A in the next progress report. Now moving to the second broad responsibility of the liquidator. First was of adjudication of claim, second is of selling the assets. But before selling the assets, liquidator needs to know what is in the pot of the liquidation estate, whether all the secured creditors have relinquished the charge on the assets of the CD or not. So to ensure that, liquidation regulations provide that the secured creditor should intimate within the first 30 days of the liquidation commencement date whether he wants to realize or relinquish the security interest. And in case he does not intimate this decision, then it's considered as a deemed relinquishment of the security interest. Further, if the secured creditor decides to realize its security interest outside the liquidation estate, then he is supposed to share the CRP cost, liquidation cost and workman dues as he was supposed to do in case he had relinquished the security interest to the liquidation estate. Further, in case he realizes much more than his admitted claim, then he needs to pay back the extra sum also to the liquidation estate. And in case he does not comply, the secured creditor does not comply with these laws, then the asset which is subject to security interest shall automatically become part of the liquidation estate. Further to this mechanism of relinquishment and realization, now a secured creditor gets a certain price, decides that I'll be selling at X price. If the liquidator within first 21 days of intimation by the secured creditor that he'll be selling at X price, he brings on the buyer who is ready to pay X plus 1, then the secured creditor needs to sell this asset to the buyer who has been brought forward by the liquidator. However, this provision, this regulation 37 under which these provisions have been made, shall not be applicable in case the secured creditor realizes the security interest under SARFAESI or the Recovery of Debts and Bankruptcy Act. There is one theme running throughout the processes of the code is that the section 29A ineligibilities. That is, a person who is not supposed to submit a resolution plan, who is not eligible to submit a resolution plan, cannot buy the asset even during the liquidation process and even through a secured creditor. Now, under the liquidation process, since the court's objective is revival of the firm, under liquidation also there are two modes of revival. First is compromise or arrangement under section 230 of the Companies Act 2013, and for this also exclusively 90 days period from the liquidation commencement date have been given, and the section 29A ineligibilities also are applicable here in this case. Suppose this compromise or arrangement does not see the light of the day, then in that case the liquidator has an option to either sell the CD as a going concern or a business of the CD as a going concern, or he can sell the assets on a standalone or a set of assets collectively or in parcels. It's very important to note that till date sale as a going concern has led to realization much higher than the liquidation value of the asset. In 6 cases wherein the sale as a going concern has happened till date, the net realization was almost 347 crore against the liquidation value of 290 crore. So approximately 40 to 50 crore extra has been generated through sale as a going concern. So it's a result of the enterprise value fetching much more realization than the assets being sold in bits and pieces. So liquidator always try to sell first the CD as a going concern, and then if they fail in that task, in that endeavor, then they move on to selling the assets in parcel or in any permutation and combination. This process for sale as a going concern has also been provided 90 days for completion, but in practice it takes sometimes much more than that. Here also section 29A ineligibilities shall apply, that the person who is not eligible to submit a resolution plan cannot buy the asset during the liquidation. Now coming to the price at which the liquidator should sell the asset. This becomes very important because the reserve price of the asset should come through a scientific methodology. For that, the liquidator either can go for the valuation conducted during the corporate insolvency resolution process, or in case due to some change circumstances he feels that he needs to undertake the fresh valuation. Like it can be in case suppose in the pre-corona times the CRP was going on, and in the post-corona times liquidator thinks, okay, the company has come into the liquidation, now I need to again go for the liquidation because probably the value of the assets have declined. Then in such circumstances the liquidator can go for fresh valuation, and he needs to appoint two liquidator within the first 7 days of the commencement of the process, who will be estimating the realizable value of the assets of the CD. Now, to further ensure that the process is not only transparent but also perceived to be transparent, the code along with the regulations provide that the assets should be sold through an auction. However, this auction mechanism can be both e-auction and a physical auction mechanism. Can be e-auction or a physical auction. E-auction is the first priority, but in case the liquidator feels that the physical auction will fetch the better value, then he will have to seek the prior approval of the adjudicating authority to undertake the physical auction of the asset. There is further flexibility provided in the regulation. However, this is a very limited circumstances that this flexibility has been provided, that the liquidator can even sell the asset through a private sale. That is, I will not sell through a auction, I will sell to a person identified by myself without inviting the others. So that's a private sale is also permitted, but only very limited circumstances has been provided for undertaking the private sale, and these are four. First is that the asset is perishable in nature. Suppose a CD has apples, lot of apples in his godown, and in case he thinks of undertaking auction, then it will take at least 1 month, and by the time the auction process get concluded and the realization happen, it would have already taken 2 to 3 months. Then the asset lot will get spoiled. So in those cases the liquidator can undertake the private sale. Then if the adjudicating authority approves that he can go for private sale, then he can undertake. If an asset, if not immediately sold, will fetch the lower value, then in that case he can go for private sale. And finally, if the asset is sold at a price higher than the price of the last failed auction, then the private sale can be undertaken. So to conclude this slide, an action and the sale can be undertaken primarily through auction, and that has to be e-auction, and physical auction and the private sale can only be undertaken in the limited circumstances. So two broad responsibilities of the liquidator we have been able to cover. Coming to the third broad responsibility, that is distribution. First was adjudication of the claim, second was sale, realization of the proceeds, and third is distribution of the realized proceeds. Now the regulations mandate that the liquidator should distribute the realized proceeds to the stakeholders within 90 days from such realization. And it is also quite possible that assets, the liquidator has done his best effort he has tried auction mechanism, he has tried private sale also, but he has not been able to sell some assets, and he has also tried the assignment possibility of assigning these assets, but still no party has come forward to buy these assets due to some strange reason associated with this asset. So in such circumstances, the liquidator can hand over or rather distribute these assets among the stakeholders also and complete the distribution stage itself. Other than these three broad responsibilities, now we have already seen that liquidation process entails basically the realization of assets, but there is another source through which some realization can happen, that is through avoidance transaction. Though my colleague in the previous presentation has already touched upon this avoidance transactions part, I'll just briefly state that these transactions, be it preferential transactions, undervalue transaction, extortionate credit transaction or fraudulent transaction, their adjudication do take time, and liquidator cannot wait endlessly for their adjudication. So notwithstanding the pendency of such applications, liquidator shall file the application for dissolution of the CD along with the final report to the adjudicating authority for closure of the process in case the CD has been sold as a going concern or its a dissolution. Suppose in some circumstance, this is the ideal framework, suppose in some circumstance there is no asset available with the CD. So there are two options. One is, which the liquidation regulations explicitly mandate, that in case the assets are not sufficient, then it needs to go for the early dissolution. Suppose there are severe circumstances that the assets, not even 1 rupee is available, then in that circumstance the CD comes directly from the CRP to the dissolution and jumping the whole stage of the liquidation process. Finally, if there is any unclaimed proceed, that needs to be deposited by the liquidator to the corporate liquidation account maintained by the IBBI, and with this the whole process gets completed. I hope I have been able to explain in a brief manner what is liquidation process. Thank you.
ताजमहल की तरह आगरा का पेठा भी दुनिया भर में मशहूर है। आगरा का पेठा अपनी मिठास के लिए दुनिया भर में जाना जाता है। आगरा आने वाले सैलानी पेठे की मिठास का लुत्फ उठाए बिना यहाँ से नहीं जाते। वैसे तो देश के कई दूसरे शहरों में भी पेठा बनाया जाता है, लेकिन आगरा का पेठा सबसे खास माना जाता है। आगरा में जगह जगह पेठे की दुकानें देखने को मिल जाती हैं। आगरा के पेठे की खासियत ये है कि इसे बनाने में घी या तेल का प्रयोग बिल्कुल नहीं किया जाता। पेठे का फल कद्दू के बराबर और लौकी के रंग का होता है। पेठा कई प्रकार का बनाया जाता है। सबसे ज्यादा सूखा पेठा बनाया जाता है। अंगूरी पेठा भी लोगों को काफी
हेलो व्यूअर्स, आज के सेशन में आपका स्वागत है। कोर्स BEV 003 सर्टिफिकेट इन सॉलिड वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट प्रोग्राम का कोर्स 3 है और इसके अंतर्गत आज हम बात करेंगे इलेक्ट्रॉनिक वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट के बारे में। इस कोर्स में प्लास्टिक वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट, हेल्थ केयर वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट और कंस्ट्रक्शन एंड डिमोलिशन वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट के बारे में चर्चा की गई है। आप सभी जानते हैं इस कोर्स को आप